Hey, this is Ashley Swartz, CEO of Furious Minds. This is my 2014 Upfront wrap up, which I do every year. So, what can we say about this year's 2014 Upfront? Wah, wah. It was slightly underwhelming. The numbers weren't so great. Overall, television's up like 3.3%. It's estimated it's going to be for all of 2014 to close the entirety of the year based on our run right now at about 68.5 billion. So if we look though at broadcast specifically, volume was down by 800 to 850 million, and cable volume was down by about 500 million or so, or 5%. And this really was attributed to a couple major advertisers like P&G, Diageo, GM, Kellogg's. P&G, for example, gave a $20 million haircut to Lifetime Networks alone. So, it's incredible how we look at the Pareto rule of sort of 20% of advertisers move 80% of the volume in the marketplace. And you see when a handful of them, literally 5 of them, make a big decision to cut their television dollars and shift spend in other places or just cut absolute spend overall, it really moves the marketplace. In total, we were down about 5 to 10% this year, which is kind of crazy. So if you look at the total upfront dollars for May's cycle, in 2013, it was about an $8.2 to $9 billion business cycle. In 2014, it's estimated to be about 8.6 to 9.2 billion. And so, that's sort of driven, volume was down and overall spend was per se, but CPMs increased in many regards. So, there was good and there was bad, right? We still got some CPM increases, but they definitely were not the big jumps that a lot of the networks held out for last year. So if we just look at the big winners, let's start there, right? Like Linda Yaccarino hit it out of the park this year. And we'll get to maybe why she did or didn't, but they were basically up in volume about 15%, which is estimated to be about $0.3 billion because they moved from 2013 to 2014 from about $2 to $2.3 billion in total spend. On their CPMs, they had a nice hike of about 7.5% to 8%, and that was about the same last year. The question has to be begged. Is this a result of the synergy from the Comcast acquisition, right? Is this the result of data? They came into this year's 2014 upfronts and had a story of addressability, right? They were using data, they had access to set-top box data, et cetera. And supposedly they came out strong in this year's selling cycle with that and leaning forward with that. Does greater efficiency and potentially higher ROI on TV investment result in shift to that broadcaster? I don't know, it begs the question, but the numbers sort of demonstrate that there was something there because the reality is that their suggestion they would be willing to light up inventory programmatically. There wasn't really a lot of meat on that bones, and I'm not sure that would actually move a market by this much volume, right? The other sort of just the bit loser, let's be real. And it all depends on how you slice that pie, right? If you just look at volume, CBS was down 13%, which is about the equivalent to about $250 to $500 million in total volume. And their CPM increase was only about 2.5% to 3.5% versus 5 to 7 they got last year. But on average, CBS is the highest CPM. So it's sort of a bittersweet story, right? If we look at the next kind of biggest loser, Fox. Their total volume was down 10 to 15%, right? That was about $500,000 in less volume they had this year, and but they did get a CPM increase of about 6%. Last year they held out for 7.5%, but still 6% isn't bad, right? So ABC down 5 to 10%, the equivalent of about 0.2 to 0.4 billion. Their CPM increase was only about 4 to 5%. Last year they held out for a 7% increase, and they got it. And CW, small network, 5% decrease in volume. And we saw about a loss of about $10 to $20 million in revenue. And that's about a 3 to 4% increase in CPM, where last year they had a little bit higher. What it sort of begs the question is, what's this all mean for scatter, right? So does it mean that total spend in television is being cannibalized by other mediums, like online video? Because we're seeing that online video is estimated to be in 2014 up 42% to $6 billion. Versus a 3% growth from 2013 to 2014 in TV. That's a 13x multiple growth rate. If you look at those curves, they're kind of like this. Does it mean that there's channel cannibalization and sort of video neutral buyers, are moving into more online video? Does it mean that total spend is less? Or does it mean that dollars are being held back? And actually what we're seeing is a smaller upfront cycle where more inventory is going to be moved on local or hyper-targetable television or in scatter inventory. I'm not sure, but I think we're going to see a lot of price gouging on major events because major events are also a bit insulated to some of the more interesting changing sort of business climates around this, right? This whole C3, C7 conversation. Group M doubling down and buying all their television in C7. What does that mean? Well, let's be real. About 4 years ago, the actual incremental lift in television from C3 to C7 was about 2%, right? Which in TV is not trivial. The estimate now is that the difference between C3 to C7 audiences is about the equivalent of 4%. And if you look at a total sort of $68.5 billion market in 2014, that's about $2.74 billion, right? That's a pretty decent chunk of change. So if we're looking at that 4% lift on a $1 billion, on $1 billion, that's $800 million. It's a pretty decent amount of, or $80 million, right? It's a pretty decent amount of volume. If you look at sort of some of the other estimates, right? Poltrak said that Dave Poltrak has been quoted in his MBA class he teaches at Stern, Word on the Street, is that he estimates if you normalize the data with lots of other caveats of the top 4 broadcasters and et cetera, that a gross rating point is worth about $300 million. So we're talking about a ton of revenue, even though the incremental changes are small because television is such a large volume market in dollars, absolute. These are big, big impacts. And individual broadcasters, moving them 4% is a couple $100 million. So it's not chump change when we actually do start to tap into that C3 to C7 window. The thing is, will anybody else do it? And going back to what I was saying kind of about how to insulate yourself from the changing market factors, the reality is that sports and events are safe from C3 to C7 sort of, shift of audiences and viewing windows. So the reality is I think you're going to see more and more broadcasters investing in sports and events. And we see that ESPN has acquired even more sports rights, which is one of the reasons that it's sort of the upfront cycle doesn't suffer, right? Programmatic, it really wasn't that present. I mean, NBC in April was like, maybe we'll launch some inventory or make some inventory available programmatically. Maybe we won't, which basically means that you can use some of our data and you can buy through the trading desk, but not really automate it. It's never auction based or anything else. It's just kind of a little bit of smoke and mirrors, like, pow, it's programmatic. And that's because agency business models are changing. So if that moves more inventory in the upfront, awesome, that's great. But there's no necessarily proof in that pudding because we haven't seen any real dollars move there. As I was talking about, online video is growing, right? And the growth rate is the 13x multiple over television. How much cannibalization is going to really occur? How much share shift is really occurring? I think there are a lot of questions to be begged. And I think, what am I walking away from this year, right? Well, doubling down on sports and events, I'm going back to it. I think that, at the end of the day, that is the hedge in this industry for scripted television, even though the cable networks, last year you saw everybody was doubling down on scripted TV. Discovery was investing in scripted programming, right? The reality is that we've seen that those investments and that ROI is not sustainable. That was proven in this year's business cycle. Cable's sort of heyday was not sustainable. These guys this year are down a substantial amount in volume. Scripted TV, as sort of some of these major shows are coming to an end, these guys have not necessarily they've demonstrated that scripted television is not a rinse and repeat model, right? Just because you've had one breakout show does not mean you're going to have another and another. It's not formulaic. Again, storytelling is an art. It's not a science. And these guys have not necessarily figured it out. Data. I'm putting my money on the fact that not just because Linda Accarino is damn smart, she's leading that business, but also because NBCU has the data and the set-top box sort of gold mine that is attached to their Comcast ownership and parent company. I'm going to bet that had a lot to do with this year's victory for them. And I think that you're going to see that. I think other programmers and broadcasters are going to have to start to figure out what their data story is. And more as rights of over-the-top become critical, given that we're going to see a duopoly on the operator side of the business with 2 players having 60% of the market. More broadcasters will retain that. We're already seeing what's happening now is that they're disabling fast forwarding and VOD, which is also going to increase that C3 sort of rating period, right? We're going to see more eyeballs within C7 actually watching commercials if we disable that fast forwarding. But as these guys start to retain more and their over-the-top rights become more important, we're also going to start to see that data and first-party data is going to begin to have meaning for programmers who have to figure out how to use that to actually drive volume and CPM. And at the end of the day, online video is going to become more and more relevant, and it's going to start to become sort of more and more as a make-good mechanic, especially if GRPs are under-delivering. And it's going to be interesting to see how online video becomes a business lever used in the scatter market to drive scatter pricing as a long tail over the course of the year, especially when it's coupled with event or sports-driven stuff that is more real-time. So that's my take. I love this time of year, and thank you for listening. And if you have comments, questions, you disagree with me, feel free to reach out. Thanks.